Hey there. Happy Friday.
Yes, our listeners are realizing that we get to always come to you on Fridays, which is exciting.
Yes, Fridays are a day for me where I have a different energy and bandwidth to be with consultation needs and my own, other people's, and so it certainly is a good time for me to be with you in this way.
Yeah,
You
well,
know, one might say, Dr. Bewley, that for me, Fridays position me in a mindset of really thinking about a lot of things that are beyond the couch and beyond the session.
mm,
So there is that for me.
yeah, same. I get excited about college football and the weekends and fall and, you know, actual fall temperatures coming into where we live
Hmm.
in North Texas.
Right, our fall, exactly. Although, do we think we're past false fall for a second? Do we think we're good there?
I think so. I'm getting ready to bring in my cactus for inside for
Already?
winter, so
Okay, okay, good to
maybe
know.
by Halloween they'll be making their entrance into my home.
Hmm. I think especially since we are about, consulting psychologists here, for any clients listening to this isn't about them at all, but it is, my Fridays, especially the way that I have my schedule set up, is it does provide me maybe a little bit of that emotional and mental transition away from the clinical work of the week. And so I think that's another reason why I'm always excited to spend time with you on Fridays, and that's just anybody, right? Anybody who works appreciates a break from that work in whatever traditional way they're doing it. And so
Yeah.
I don't think that I know I get that a lot from folks of like, you must love your job, or, you know, when you love your job, it never feels like work, or and I don't know about you, but I have that conversation a lot with folks that I do love my job and I get to spend time with people in a way that most people don't. And that doesn't mean that it isn't work. And
Totally.
and I think that that's just one of those misconceptions about the helping professions, particularly being a psychologist or a therapist, mental health therapist of any sort, that it's not work. And I assure you that I know that my partner knows, and I'm sure yours does too, that some days I go home nonverbal.
Absolutely. And maybe I think partners need a support group sometimes of like, oh, I remember my telling my partner that you had similar feelings about that once, and he was like, wait, what? Like this would have been helpful to know years ago,
The
because
consent form for marrying a psychologist.
yeah. Well, I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today
Yes.
on this episode of the Consulting Psychologists, introducing the topic for maybe more for therapists, but um, do you have an in-person office versus a telehealth office, or do you have a hybrid?
Hmm.
So we're going to talk about this, and I think over the past few years, but especially since 2020 and the pandemic, telehealth has sort of reshaped what it means to kind of go to therapy. But now that in-person offices and in-person care is fully available again, I know many therapists and clients are kind of asking like, do I stay telehealth or do you have an in-person office? Or, just um, thinking about that dilemma that I know it's been on our minds.
Hmm. Absolutely. It came up for me actually just this week in my mind. I was sitting with a client who recently moved to another state, and we have the privilege of working together virtually since that move because I'm a member of PsyPact, which is great for continuity of care and being able to build on the rapport that we have established as a result of in-person sessions for a while. But they were in town for, whatever reason. And so we were able to meet in person, and we talked about how different it felt to be in person together.
Mm.
And in my mind, the thought that I was having was like, this right here is why I have an office still for me. this right, the potential to have these moments of somebody just sit down on the couch and have that like plop of relief to be in this space knowing what they were going to be able to feel with me. And that was really meaningful. I probably don't have that feeling enough right now based on some of the ways that our practices have changed since COVID, but that was this week that was so poignant for me. I wonder if you've had any of those moments.
Yeah, I think, well, when I think about my schedule, so I do have an in-person office, and actually even during the pandemic, I went to my office and did all my video sessions from there. I know for me, professionally speaking, I cannot work from home. And maybe I could if, I was an accountant or had focus on numbers, but my dogs want to be in the room, the kitchen's calling me. There's so many distractions that I know I can't work from home. So having a telehealth office was never fully an option in my brain. But, you know, just tracking my weekly schedule, it's about 50-50, and um probably prefer it to be like 75% in person.
Same.
Um, but I do appreciate the flexibility for some clients who get stuck at work or get stuck in
Mhm.
traffic and are able to just pull over to a park and be able to continue our session.
Mhm.
That's what I appreciate about telehealth. But I've been wondering, just in terms of um, feasibility moving forward, if the percentage changed more towards telehealth, what's the worth of an in-person office with the expenses that come with that?
Absolutely. Let me just I wonder if anybody listening to this has the same experience, but before the pandemic, telehealth was like, I mean, I would say non-existent. I think I had one person who had requested that. And as an insurance-based provider, I said, I don't know if that's covered by your plan. You can call or we can try it and see what happens, right? But ultimately, if they don't pay for telehealth sessions, that will be your responsibility. And so I think I had one person who knew they had telehealth options because of the plan they selected based on some chronic health needs they had. And so one person in my whole caseload and everybody else was in person. So it was an anomaly. It was a special circumstance. It wasn't a norm. And I still look back and it's October of 2025 and just 5.5 years ago, how our worlds really did a 180 in the way that we practiced. And no one was prepared for it. We were all building it as it came along.
Yeah.
We were just, surviving to get by emotionally and logistically you know, and so to think about your practice being maybe 50-50, and I would agree that it's a genie that isn't going back in the bottle. I've said that all along. And I do prefer an in-person session. I don't think that can be replaced, but telehealth sessions, I think for me, feel easier when there was an in-person element to that rapport building. And I've had clients who I have still to this day never met in person, and maybe they're not even real, I don't know. But that it went fine. And I believe that rapport was strong and there was a lot of intimacy and vulnerability in the virtual space. And so I guess, in some ways, I think we should all give ourselves a pat on the back about our adaptation, especially to something that we, in our minds before that time, had thought we would never do.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, that's us practicing that psychological flexibility, which is what helped people succeed through the pandemic the most, is when you're able to be flexible with, okay, I need distance, or I need to wear a mask now, or I need to, you know, take these safety precautions. People who struggled with that struggled more with the pandemic. And
It's
I
a really
think
good
therapist
point.
wise too, if you struggled to integrate telehealth, then I'm sure your practice struggled.
Hmm.
Um,
It's a really good
I,
point.
I want to kind of just ground us in some just kind of quick points though around kind of some research in this area. So for many conditions such as depression, anxiety, potential PTSD, telehealth is roughly as effective as in-person therapy. Um, Telehealth definitely improves attendance and access for clients, and I know we know that. That's part of the benefits for telehealth is that our attendance is up, and that's part of maybe the struggle is that you're packed, and rarely do you experience more cancellations than that. There is some research that shows that, the therapeutic alliance can be established just as well in a video therapist relationship, but there's maybe a little bit of a slight um, indication for a stronger therapeutic alliance from in-person sessions. Um, the difference is so small and it is mixed across some studies, so it's nothing to kind of write home about, but there's maybe a little bit of a trend that shows that maybe in-person sessions, in-person therapy has a slighter increase in therapeutic alliance outcomes, I guess.
What do you know, or what do you think that's attributable to?
Well, I think when I think about some clients that I've seen that have previously only had video sessions, and then they're like, I want to try in person. Then they come into the session in the office and they realize, like, wait, you know, I'm sitting in this room 5 feet away from you. I can't necessarily disconnect as easy, or my emotion is more in the room. And then they can also see me and experience me in a more, real person kind of way. I think it potentially adds a little bit of safety that maybe is a little bit different. And that's just in my brain. That doesn't,
Yeah, 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 off the dome, right?
yeah.
Um, I think that there's something to that. I think that it humanizes. The first thing you said was that it humanizes you to them in maybe a different way. It makes you more real, more of a real person in the way that you might maybe adjust in your seat or engage with, move your body oriented towards them in a moment of vulnerability or whatever it may be. So I definitely think that it humanizes you, which makes it easier, which deepens connection.
Hmm.
Um, but to your point of it increasing safety, I do think that's part of the same, but also a different thing in that if folks are pursuing therapy for relationship issues with their, people that they live with, or, they still live in a home in which they've experienced some kind of trauma, um, or their space isn't conducive to their best wellness. It's this idea that it's really hard to heal in the space that hurt you or with the people who hurt
Hmm.
you, right? And so the physical office really is a reprieve for people from that.
Yeah, that's great.
And similarly, that's me kind of thinking out loud and about what I've seen with my folks that people want to be in person because it takes them out of the environment that's keeping them stuck. And I don't think that can be underestimated
Yeah.
in being able to be present differently.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, telehealth, as much as it does increase access and lowers barriers, it also adds barriers for me where the technology issues, the audio issues, can really kind of get in the way of really emotional processing at times. Where, what was that? Or what did you say? Or you froze, or I'm frozen, or, it can really undermine progress. And maybe I need to work closer with my internet provider to, to make that less of a barrier, but it just seems like that's a constant thorn
Yeah.
in my side.
I will say that I have at my office, which is where I am now, I have the opportunity to be hardwired. And I do think that that reduces those barriers on my end. But most people who hardwires their internet anymore, right? Usually it's a
I was going to
router.
ask, what does that mean?
Yeah,
Like you have the cord into the
yes.
computer?
No, that's I've cord from my computer to the wall. You're totally right. And so, but who does that anymore? So it's like, in a wireless world, the things that are likely going to help reduce those barriers are kind of obsolete,
Hmm.
right? Because if I'm at home and working from home, which I also don't like and don't do very often, I do it in a very limited way. Um, that whenever I'm at home, I I have wireless internet at home, and sometimes my internet's the culprit of a weak connection or that those symptoms that you just talked about. So I agree that it is a barrier that can't be underestimated.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it sounds like the research supports that it's not so much a barrier that it's not effective, but still it's an impact on the lived experience of being a psychologist or a client of a psychologist.
Yeah, definitely. I had just a random rabbit trail I went down where I don't know if you've seen In Treatment on HBO, the new season. I'm trying to remember the main character's real name. Um, gosh, somebody's listening right now is probably saying it out loud, and
Yelling at you right now, yeah.
yeah, but I taught a grad class a few years ago, and I showed some of the episodes of this In Treatment. I really like the show overall, but the newer season is kind of more integrated with telehealth, and the psychologist in it, she only does telehealth sessions, and her setup at home, by the way, her home is like $1 million home, and told the students like, hey, I don't know what she's doing, but this is probably not the route that you're on. But it was
Not the
just
right
this
I'm
real
on.
it was just this like example of like how seamless and like how easy the her whole process was with telehealth, and it wasn't even a factor, and it made it look really appealing, and um it wasn't based fully in reality. I mean, obviously it's a show,
Right.
but I also think that there's something nice about it too. Like, I know we're kind of going back and forth with the strengths and criticisms of it, but I had terminated with somebody recently where we started during the pandemic, and we had worked together for 5 years, and we had probably about 2.5 years into treatment transitioned to in-person sessions. And in our termination, we talked about like, do you remember we started in the pandemic, we started, 2.5 years in a video therapy relationship.
Hmm.
And it was both of this example of like, we both didn't really remember that. We both, had this experience of really just having a really strong therapeutic alliance. And I do think that benefits of when you are an effective therapist, you can create a strong therapy relationship with clients if you only see them in video sessions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, let's differ, I do think there's a preference that's involved. I think your comments earlier about openness to adaptation will also impact one's ability or success in creating rapport via video sessions and being able to really immerse themselves into that space. Um, so it's preference, it's openness, the therapist is the tool, and everywhere you go, there you are. And if you struggle to create rapport in person, you're likely going to struggle to create that on video too. And so
Mm.
that's not a modality issue. That is probably some therapist factors that need really intentional consultation and exploration around that. I think that for folks who are not, or for therapists who are less comfortable with vulnerability with themselves, they're less willing to make themselves truly available in whatever space, whether that's virtually or I point over here because that's where my couch is. Um, and I do, we learn that in graduate school that our work is going to be the limiting factor of our work is going to be our personal factors. And so that's not a judgment. It's more about what are those personal factors and how can you work on those so that you can create rapport with anybody anywhere, right?
Yeah.
I talk to my clients a lot about wellness isn't attributable to your emotional support water bottle, right? Like your wellness cannot be externally focused or tethered to something external. I mean, it can include that, but wellness is in you. You have the capacity for that. So how do you practice it? How do you connect inward to be well? And so I think it's a parallel process for us too, that we have the capacity to be therapeutic and open and provide a safe space anywhere. It's not connected to my cute little blue couch that you can see in the background, right? It's it's about what I bring to the space. And I know that on days when I am distracted, telehealth feels harder.
Yeah.
And I would be delusional to think, or in denial to think that that's probably not felt in some way. But thankfully, all of the rapport building up to that point maybe helps people allow me to be human at times too. And that's not to say it isn't true when people are in office. It's more, but I think that if we are not in tune with ourselves, then it does impact how we show up wherever we're showing up.
Great. Love it. Two things. One is first, the actress is Uzo Aduba, who is also in Orange is the New Black,
Okay.
plays Crazy Eyes in that series. So just wanted to close that loop. So,
Okay, thank you. Thank
but
you.
the
All
second
the
part of what
listeners
you,
can call
yes,
can now feel rest assured that
find
we got it
relief.
together.
Yeah. The second part though, like the therapeutic factor or the therapist factors that could get in the way, I guess. What do you notice? How do you show up differently when you're on a video session versus in person?
Hmm. You're calling for vulnerability now, Dr. Bewley. Um, let's see. How do I show up differently? I think that I I shift into a mindset differently, right? So before an in-person session, I might get up from wherever I am, do, some shoulder rolls, just kind of like check my teeth in the mirror and then open the door and greet them in. I don't think I do that. I think that um I feel more rushed in some ways with video sessions, and I can't really explain why. But I don't know that I have that transition moment that helps me go from one session to another for video. And now that I'm saying that out loud, I think I need to
Mm,
make sure that I do that. Um, One of the things that I had to learn and force myself to do was turn off notifications on my computer, right? And whether it's a random text or the way that I might get a notification that I have an email or whatever, those things are visible to other people, not the notifications themselves, but our awareness of the notification. And again, we are delusional if we think that we're good at hiding it.
yeah.
Um, Fighting the urge to do something in the background. I think we have all been in a situation where we might do that. Um, and it's not about judging or shaming anybody who does stuff in the background or who has shared the experience of having the urge to do something in the background, but that urge to do it and then to be with myself of like, no, no, that's a distraction, right? And does the client know exactly what I'm thinking about? No, but might I have to say, yeah, you're making some interesting points. I want you to say that again out loud for yourself. But really it's for me, right? Like
Yeah.
we were in tune enough to know it was important, but we wouldn't be able to repeat back to them what they said, and that's a disservice. Right? We're
Yeah.
human and it happens in person too. We're thinking about our grocery list or that stressor that's occurring in our life, beyond the couch in that way. But those are the things that we have to hold ourselves accountable to. And I think the distractions are greater when we're on a screen that holds all of our work. And that's one of the reasons I don't like working from home.
Yeah.
I am focused on all the chores I need to do, or the things I'm like, oh, I could paint that, or oh, I could decorate in this way. And I'm like, stop it, get focused, right? And um, I don't know. I think that those are some of the things that I face in virtual appointments, telehealth appointments, that may impact how I'm able to show up. Um, Let me think about that some more. What about what comes up for you about how that impacts you?
You mean if I want to get a post-it note or a paper clip, you can't tell I'm getting that right now? I mean, I think that that's part of it is like this, the distractions.
Yeah.
I'm a fidgety person, and if I'm in video, I can be fidgeting with my fingers and hands right now, and doing some kind of ground presses with my feet that I wouldn't do in a in-person session because it would be absolutely too distracting. And I think part of it, what's been on my mind this week is like I need a new therapy chair for my desk because I sit in this office chair for half of the week and it just doesn't do it for me.
Hmm.
Where that issue doesn't play out at my, nice leather chair,
Yeah.
um, faux leather, but um, but yeah, I think that I noticed that I can distract myself more in video,
Hmm.
versus if I'm in person, it just feels like I am more present and I am more aware of my full body. And I think I appreciate that about in-person sessions is that there are more nonverbal contextual cues, body language, appearance,
Hmm.
affect that can really, I think, improve my assessment of what's happening with our
Yeah,
work and just rapport.
absolutely. Another thing that it can be distracting for me around virtual sessions, differently than in person, is that when people use virtual backgrounds, right? I really dislike that my electronic health record system has the option for clients to use virtual backgrounds because part of the data that we get as therapists is observing their environment, right? And maybe it's messier in the background, or maybe they're not at home, right? And so, we are supposed to ask every time, where are you meeting with me from today? And that way we document that. But when you see their background, you come to know their environment. And that creates, I think, also a sense of safety, or just a sense of immediate understanding about the situation. That when they use virtual backgrounds, what do you feel like you need to hide in this moment? How is that allowing you to shield away from vulnerability and whatever's going on? Now, I'm going to say that to you out of the other side of my mouth. I have a virtual background too, right? But that's the double standard of therapy. That's maybe the therapeutic power that um maybe my virtual background isn't as noticeable. It is a picture of my office. So, you know, that's different. A client doesn't need to see my context in the same way that I have a therapeutic responsibility to evaluate what may be going on in theirs. So,
Yeah,
I do want to just allow that therapeutic double standard to exist, or that double standard of power as a therapist to coexist. But I do think that those virtual backgrounds can really impair um, rapport.
especially when they pick the one at the beach and you're like, then all you can think about is, I want to be on a beach.
There, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, or the little like country cottage, or English cottage, and it's like that it becomes a projective.
Yeah,
Like, what, help me understand your choice of that one. But that's
yeah.
distracting, right? It's taking away maybe from what
Hmm.
really needs to be discussed at hand.
Well, and I mean, I think that this is a great point. If you have a telehealth office, really being intentional about what your background is. This is my home office, so there's a lot of books. My office telehealth background is basically a white wall, and you can see part of my um, licensure frame and
Hmm.
where I did my doctoral internship. But it's pretty blank, and that also not to be too distracting. I know if I was working with me and I would be wanting to look at all these books on my bookshelf.
Hmm.
So I think it's
Yeah.
good to be aware of what are you, what is your background.
Right.
Um, we've been talking for years, and I just found out months ago that this was not the visual background because it looks exactly like your office when I'm in it.
Right. No, I'm pleased to hear that. For the longest time, especially before any in-person sessions were happening, I had my computer turned around so that this was the background. But as it's more of a hybrid now, it's it needs to not be like that anymore.
Yeah.
So, but again, I think there is, I think therapeutic power is a bigger conversation for another day. And to plant that seed, it inherently exists, and we're not wrong for it existing. And I think that I can find peace and acceptance that it's okay that I have a virtual background, but I don't want you to have one. And even being able to talk transparently about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
and this is, I think somebody coming into your office sees what books you have on your bookshelf or sees how you decorate the space or
mhm,
where you got that candle or what plants you
mhm,
have. And, I think it does invite you to be more seen in a vulnerable way that sometimes people don't want, but, or struggle with, or,
right.
um, and maybe, depending on where that occurs in the therapy relationship, there's space to be able to be open about, you know, um, sharing a little bit more about your office space. But I've been with clients who I've seen for weeks upon weeks upon weeks, and they're dealing with depression or anxiety or struggle, and they look up and they're like, "How long have you had that painting there?" And I'm like, "That's been there the entire time." And there's something that shifted that allowed them to see it. And that's great data of like what about your experience is helping you look at your surroundings differently. And to me, that's the kind of stuff that gets lost when you're only in video.
Mhm.
Now, I do feel like process wise, we are in this train of like in person is way better than video, but I would also argue that we probably both wouldn't want to stop telehealth sessions. Question mark?
So I think this goes back to, because research really supports that both are roughly equally effective. It's not about one is better than the other, but I do think that in-person sessions are better for me.
Mhm. Yeah.
So if I could go back to a fully in-person practice, I would elect that. Um, I think. But I also respect that that genie can't go back in the bottle. And I've had the opportunity to work with folks, and folks have had the opportunity to pursue therapy when maybe they never could before, because hours and their work hours and my availability, or just the general therapist availability didn't match. And so to have a meeting with somebody on their lunch break from their office at work or the parking garage where they can have privacy, that continues to be something that I find so in alignment with my values for accessible care. So I wouldn't exclude telehealth. I don't think I'd ever exclude telehealth unless it wasn't a covered service. But even then, I wouldn't exclude it if people wanted to opt for that in a private pay scenario. Um, but I would welcome people coming back into the office. So for me, I don't see myself at this point in time being not having a physical office.
Yeah.
Would it save a lot of money? Would it help increase my profitability because I didn't have the overhead associated with an office? Yup.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, you heard it here first. And I tend to agree with you. Like I think, I definitely prefer in person, and I'm vocal about that with clients from the first phone consultation. If we can meet in person, that would be what I recommend. That's what I prefer. And if that means a commute for you, then let's start with in person. And then if it becomes cumbersome, then we can talk about the potential for
I love that.
transitioning. But I would like to create our therapy relationship from in person and then transfer as needed to telehealth.
I am taking that in my pocket because that is an excellent use of therapeutic power. You're not forcing it, but you are requesting it. and encouraging it because we know how beneficial that could be. And I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I want to bring up one piece real quick about another layer of the strengths of having an in-person office is dependent on case presentation. And when you're working with higher risk issues or
Mhm.
more complex cases, aka trauma, um, that's what research has shown is that safety interventions, um, care for those more complex needs are definitely better met in-person spaces. And I know that for me, if I'm working with somebody who's experiencing suicidal ideation,
Mhm.
I feel like our ability to talk about it, there's less barriers that get in the way. If we are in the room together, we can work on a coping plan, a hard copy that we can both work together. Where video, it just feels, I don't know, it brings up my own um, anxiety around, you know, doing that kind of intervention from afar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That makes great sense. I mean, absolutely no, that knowledge that higher acuity folks do need to are not the best fit for telehealth. If we can get them less symptomatic and more emotionally stable, then that transition can happen. And so I think that that brings up another really good reminder that when we are in a position like that, using appropriate therapeutic power to say, this is not a good fit for you. Clinical indications say that an in-person service is going to be best for what you're needing at this time. And so if my office isn't where you can get to, then then we need to find you someone that you can get to. And that's not therapeutic power over. That is clinical indication, that is ethical referral and use of therapeutic power to give that feedback.
Mm.
So, I think you bring up such an excellent point on that. What I was going to bring up is slightly different. And so, as we navigate a hybrid world for most of us, of virtual and in-person services, we can't um, ignore that managed care comes into play, as I know that we are both, we have values in accepting insurance as an access to care, as a way that we increase access to care. And as telehealth waivers are finally beginning to be addressed and not just extended since the pandemic from a CMS, um, Medicare standpoint, which is sort of the gold standard in response to which all other insurance are sort of base their policies. I am not gonna, we may need to talk about this in the future from a more informed standpoint, but I want to bring up that for Medicare, there is going to be, while telehealth is going to remain, there's going to be an expectation that providers see their Medicare clients at least once in a 12-month period of treatment. And that is throwing a wrench in things, because if I'm working with somebody based on one of my specialties who lives in South Texas or in, Austin, that means that they would have to have an in-person appointment at some point in the 12-month year of service. And that may be unfeasible for a lot of folks. Now, there are some caveats that say that if that causes an undue burden on someone or is detrimental to their well-being in some way, then that can be waived, right? And so what we're not getting is a lot of guidance on what that documentation needs to look like. But let's say a 67-year-old woman who lives in Austin doesn't need to be driving to DFW for a 1 hour therapy appointment for this stipulation, right? Maybe she's a spring chicken and she could, but is that really a value add to her care or a potential value subtract?
Yeah.
So those are some things that are coming down the pike that we are having to navigate, especially for those of us who may be Medicare providers. And you know, what I don't know is how or if that will translate to other commercial insurances or not. So time will tell. I think that we could do you know, an episode just on some of these nuances of being a managed care provider. But, you know, I think that also just comes into play. Then I get, you know, how does a virtual only practice serve communities like the Medicare community?
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought up the managed care piece. I know, you know, at least in Texas recently, one insurance company had made an error where telehealth claims were just getting
Oh,
denied across the board. And it came to fruition that it was an internal error.
hmm,
But for a hot minute, there was concern that, you know, all of a sudden this insurance company was no longer covering telehealth sessions. And I know my initial uh, planning was anybody that I could see in person, I was requesting them to come in to not have additional claims be denied.
hmm,
And for them too, in terms of if that was denied, then, you know, that would be on them. So I think that that was a moment where I really appreciated my office even
yeah,
more so because if I was only telehealth, I think that would bring up a really intense um, concern around, is this service going to be continued to be covered in a managed care clientele?
absolutely. I think that what I hear a lot whenever in various professional spaces, whenever I vent about these kinds of issues, is that people maybe they work in agencies where this really isn't part of their concern, or they are in private practice like us, and maybe they're cash only, you know, that it's a fee for service only situation. And they may say, well, that's why I don't take insurance, or, you know, something like that. And, you know, I appreciate being able to vent with you about the managed care aspects without it threatening the value that it brings for me, or, you know, you at this point, you know, and it can change for either of us at any time. But I remain rooted in values for accessible mental health care. And that may be one day to my detriment. And but at the end, I will be fulfilled, even if it is that I did my best to create accessible mental health care. And so, you know, that's just not the solve. The solve isn't then, my words, my opinion, the solve isn't going to be about then just creating mental health to be a resource for the wealthy or those who can afford to pay it.
Mhm.
It's it's the same thing as I think a parent who says my kid is wild, or their energy their energy goes for days, or they're just it's you know parenting is really hard, and parenting is really hard. I think it's the hardest job there ever is. But you wouldn't then say, well, I guess you shouldn't have had kids, or that's why you should just give your kid away, right? You would never say that. And I, you know,
Yeah.
not to say that my practice is my kid. I just think there's a fallacy in that logic, right? That
Mhm.
it being hard or frustrating at times doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. So I don't know. That always strikes a nerve for me, and so I appreciate being able to lament a little bit about this aspect of the way that we practice, without it meaning that it's something that we shouldn't be doing for now or in the future. And it may change for us for various reasons and ways, but that's kind of just the snapshot of how I see it right now.
Yeah, that's a
End
really great
rant.
point. Hey, you had the mic and you dropped it, and we all listened, and it was lovely. So appreciate the rant.
Yeah.
Um, well, I wonder what else is coming up for you. Anything else that you think you'd want to talk out on this topic?
You know, I would also put this out, especially for those virtual only therapists who tune in for us. Um, and even as we navigate our own offices, for those of us who are hybrid or even in person only, is that in this virtual telehealth world, um, I do find value in having a separate space to work from. And so to your point about not liking working from home, I also, I don't have a large house. I don't have a dedicated office. Whenever I'm working from home, I'm working by myself in a specific part of my house where I know I'm not going to be interrupted. But it's not a dedicated space that I can work from all the time because I don't have a door that I can shut and so forth. And so it's only under certain circumstances that I can do that. And so there's those limitations that exist from a, potentially going all virtual standpoint, but also for me and for those of you out there who listen to this too, that I really need to keep my home homey, and my office, having an office that I work from, even with my virtual sessions, provides me an opportunity to compartmentalize these aspects of my life. Um, Figuratively, but very literally as well. And that goes very far for me in the sustainability of this work that we do. And if for those of you who feel similarly, I just want to create some normalization. And for those of you who don't need that more defined physical compartmentalization, teach me your ways. But also maybe not, because I don't dislike that. I like to keep those things really separate. It means that home really stays a reprieve and a restful, relaxing space, which I think is important for us all. So, maybe people have a designated office that they can close the door to when they're in it, but also when they're outside of it. And that works, and that's great. I just don't have that. So I'm thankful for my office, even for virtual sessions and that
Yeah,
sustainability.
love that. The office itself, acts as that therapeutic container, and it's a boundary between your daily life and the work. So I think that can't be overemphasized.
Yes,
That gets the heart.
that
No,
gets the heart.
that's if you're Dr. Lavelle's client, that's when you know you're doing a good job.
Clients have made that exact statement. They're like, got a heart today.
It's like the Great British Baking Show. It's if you get a handshake, you might be the star baker for that week.
Oh, I love that. Well, do you have anything else to add?
I don't. I mean, I think the only thing maybe we didn't talk about was just the kind of the Zoom fatigue or video fatigue. I know we
Oh,
don't use Zoom necessarily, but just the video
video
fatigue also,
fatigue.
I know we've been talking about limiting our, you know, um, screen time,
Hmm.
but I do think that that's even more so when you're using, you know, video sessions for half or for throughout your week.
Absolutely. And that's a health issue, right? Because I do think that it can actually cause some like eye damage over time if you're not taking breaks appropriately, or if you're not doing that thing where you're looking at something close and then you need to look at something far away every, intermittently, or wearing blue
Mhm.
light blocking glasses or something. I don't wear blue light blocking glasses because I did LASIK, so I didn't have to wear glasses at all. So it's like, I'll be damned if I have to wear glasses now that don't enhance my vision but protect my eyeball. Like, I can't take that on. But I think that's the other good part about maybe a hybrid situation, is it helps balance some of that out naturally.
Yeah. Well, it's been a good talk, and
It's been a great talk. Yeah.
I hope our listeners find this helpful and, reflective in their own
Hmm.
process, whether that's
Hmm.
an in-person couch or video
The
couch.
virtual couch. Yep.
Yeah.
And that when they're needing just to be normalized in that experience, that the consulting psychologist is where they turn. So that's certainly my hope and goal, and look forward to continuing being a voice of normalization and saying the things that we all experience but maybe don't say out loud, and continuing to rock and roll on that. Yeah.
All
Awesome.
right. Well, until next time.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.